Let's do some fan questions.
All right, Uncle Chael, what do you think of Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez? Maybe California, maybe Anaheim. Who knows?
Oh, what do I think about Yair and Brian Ortega? I love it. I love it. You know, that division is such a mess right now because it's so much fun to argue about who should get the title shot and who should be the number one contender. I mean, that's a fun time in fight fans, and that's where you want every division in all combat sports at all times, but you almost never get it. It's usually pretty clear who's fighting who, or sometimes it's not clear at all. That's the worst. I remember when Cyborg was champion, it's like, well, who's the number one contender? Nobody even wanted to fight her. People are leaving the division to not fight her. That wasn't as much fun. Having a good, honest argument, you bring up 145 pounds, Ortega's not in the discussion. He's not going to be in the discussion for a title fight, but he's always going to be in the discussion for a big fight, right? I'm talking about right now. Ortega goes and gets a win, you're having a different Ortega. But you do have Yair, you do have Zabit, you do have the Zombie, and frankly, it's not a terrible argument to start banging on the Max Holloway drum. I mean, when did Max ever become a bad choice? And I don't know, quite frankly, I can't think of a favor that Max has ever asked for. Now, that's not my business, but it would seem to me that if you were of Team Holloway and getting back in there with Volkanovski, now's not the worst time in the world. I don't know that he wins the argument, but I don't know that he's very far behind the other guys that I just mentioned. And the mere fact that we can have an argument and that we must include all four of those guys, pretty good spot for the featherweight division. Now, let's focus specifically on what you said. Brian Ortega versus Yair. Yes, that's fun. That is very fun. I would be interested if that was a main event, because if it wasn't, it would be 3 rounds. And 3 rounds would change my opinion of that fight, the way both of those guys go out there. Yair's a little bit more of a sprinter. Ortega is a little bit, he likes to come on. He likes to come on after 4 and 5 and 6 minutes. So that's an interesting matchup. If Yair isn't going to go into a title shot, where are you going to put him? I mean, there's so much talk about Yair versus Zabit. That, in many ways, is a video game come to life. I mean, that would be a true dream fight. You've got your super fights and you got your title fights. You got your BMF fights, but a dream where you close your eyes and you can't even really picture and imagine what would happen really is Yair and Zabit. The problem with matching those guys up, and as simple as it is to send them contracts and get a name on a page, I would have to really think that one through. If I'm the matchmaker over you, I'm going to have to really think, because I'm burning one of them. I mean, that's the byproduct of that. I could put them in a top contenders fight, sure, but they're already top contenders. No way around it. They already are. So now I'm going to burn one of them to make a great fight and then send whoever comes out of the ashes of that in there with Volkanovski. That's a hard thing to do. Particularly when you got a new, young, hungry Volkanovski that's looking to fight somebody and really isn't wanting to sit around 3 more months until that fight happens and then wait around another 4 months until he gets in there with one of them. I'm just saying, timing-wise, it's a little bit tough to put Zabit and Yair together. I think if you put Zabit in for the title, and I think he's got a damn good argument as to why he should be there, that does open up Yair. I like what you're saying about Ortega.
Hey, Uncle Chael. So check this out. I saw Colby Covington at CVS here in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I got to tell you, man, he was a cool guy. He was not the heel that he, pretends to be, if you would. He was just a normal, cool guy, like very humble. I completely fanboyed out when I saw him, he was just standing in line. He proceeded to stand there and answer all my questions. He, he wasn't in a rush or anything like that. He was just so cool, man. And here's my question. Do you think now that he has, earned this, this attention from playing this heel, that he should somewhat, roll it back a little and show, kind of who he really is? So you get where I'm going with this?
I do understand your question, and that's cool that you walked up and said hello. I'm glad you had a good experience with him. I will tell you, I don't love the idea of people saying that Colby is playing a character. Look, Colby is an entertainer in the entertainment business, okay? but he loves to stick it to the fans when he's got a microphone. Well, in all fairness, most of you fans haven't been all that nice to him. So if he wants to stick it back to you, when's the last time a fan went online? When's the last time a fan said something nice? I mean, it sounds like you did yesterday in the CVS, but I mean, do you get my point? You guys aren't all that nice to him. He's not all that nice to you back. And then people want to say it's an act. I don't see where it's an act. You put a finger in my chest, I put one back in yours. Sounds like we're even here. Same thing goes with his opponents. People say, well, it's a big act. Well, the dirty, rotten cage fight in Colby that I just saw, getting a dirty, rotten fight with Kamaru Usman, seemed like it was as advertised to me. Kamaru wasn't looking to be all that nice to him. Colby wasn't looking to be nice to Kamaru. Whether it was in the cage, it was at the press conference, or it was in the buffet line at the Palms. I mean, it seems to be, look, I like the idea entertainer. I don't love the idea character because it makes it sound as though he's, for some reason, for me in my interpretation, whenever I hear that, it's as though he's trying to sell you something or he's trying to dupe you. I don't really see it like that. He's got a guy that has a message and he's not afraid to get his message out there, and he found a bit of a creative way to do it. That to me sounds like you've got an entertainer. But for some reason, I do feel like this is all this persona and it's all drawn. Look, people are coming over to Colby. That I can tell you. I was in the arena. There was 10,000 other people in the arena. There was no energy and no buzz and no sound like when Colby made his walk to the ring and got introduced by Bruce Buffer. We had titles change hands earlier that night. We had 3 world championships contested that night. We had some very popular athletes. Uriah Faber walked out. You never heard a pop in a building like when Uriah Faber comes out. I'm telling you. There was an energy around Colby that was undeniable. And I don't think that it comes because he's working a character. I think he's an angry guy that's found a way to tell you he's angry. And if he wants to go down the road, all of a sudden he's a little bit less angry and wants to show us that, I have a feeling people are going to say, oh, he's showing a softer side and he's reinventing his character. He's an entertainer. That's the question. He entertains, but he tells you how he feels in his own words. I think that's probably a little bit of what you saw in the CVS line. I don't imagine you walked up and threw an insult at him. I imagine you were a gentleman. And what'd you get back? A gentleman.
Hi, Uncle Chael. This is Paul from Australia, but living in Colombia, as you can see in the background. Big fan of the show. I have a question about the Conor McGregor and Cerrone fight. I think a lot of people are writing off Cerrone. I really think that he's going to pull it off with a leg kick to the stomach or something like that. What do you think about that? I think he has more tools in his toolbox than McGregor.
Oh, you're spot on with that. Look, you're going to find out who's going to win this fight within the first 3 minutes of this fight, right? I mean, if you just go back and look on paper, Conor largely has one way to win, which is knockouts. I believe he's only won 2 decisions in his career. Max Holloway, Nate Diaz Part 2. I believe. This is off the top of my head. I also believe he doesn't have any submissions. If he did get them, it was in a smaller show and it wasn't the UFC. So if you go back and look at his record, you might find out that Chael's memory is close but not perfect. But Cowboy's got all sorts of ways to win. He'll stretch your leg out. He'll stretch your arm out. Cut the oxygen off to your head. He'll knock you out with body shots. He'll knock you out with head kick. I mean, Cowboy has a lot of ways to win. Conor's got some very dynamic strikes, and he's got power in his left hand. And yes, I do think that you're right. Cowboy just has more ways to win, particularly when you look at the fact that Conor's been out for a little bit, no matter how focused he's been for a short period of time. And Donald Cerrone has been riding this horse. I mean, he's in camp, he's making weights, he's walking out there, he's getting rounds in. I think that it's very relevant. I think those two are very close athletes to begin with. Then when you start to make it at welterweight and you start to make it a 5-round contest and you start to, I just think there's a lot of pieces to this that only favor Cowboy. And yeah, if you wanted to talk about how dynamic Conor is, and look, Donald's going to come out and he's going to fight him standing up first, and that's a big mistake. You've got the right to say all of those things. How much of it is a mistake? Look, Conor is a very unique striker. He's very different. He's very unorthodox. He's even a southpaw, and he's lightning fast. Lightning fast. But to act like that's not Cowboy Cerrone's world, Cowboy would rather stand up and fight you. He'd rather you took the grappling and the submissions and all that out of it. Just make it a straight-up fisticuffs. I'm telling you, this is a Brer Rabbit situation. Don't throw me in the briar patch. And yes, Donald is wheeling him in. Now, Is this going to turn out to be a, hey, Donald, be careful what you ask for because you just got it situation? We're going to have to find out. Let those boys go out there and do the fighting. But for you and I to just be discussing the fight, yes, man, you're very within your limits to believe this is a hard night for Conor McGregor.
Hey, Chael. My name is Tyler, and I have a question about rhythm and timing in the context of a fight. When you're listening to a fight or watching a fight, I always hear the announcer talk about a guy's trying to find his rhythm or get his timing down. What did those mean when you're talking within the context of a fight? And what did those mean to you when you were fighting during your career? How did you use those? Thanks.
Okay, so they have very specific meanings, but the meanings are a little bit less sophisticated and a little less valuable than fight announcers will lead you to believe. Look, you have to understand this whole thing really started from boxing. Now, boxing is a painfully boring contest to watch. Now, it's boring because it's scheduled for 12 rounds, used to be scheduled for 15 minutes, and the human body just simply can't go that long. So what boxers would do is they would have an unwritten agreement between each other. They would come out, they'd let the bell ring, they'd touch gloves, and then they would just circle and feel each other out and stare at each other for 4 and 5 rounds. And the unwritten agreement was, look, I can't go for 12 rounds, but I know that you can't either. So let's just burn a number of rounds, then we'll get into this thing. And don't forget, a fighter's greatest fear going into battle is not failure. Fighter's greatest fear, his number one fear, is fatigue. That he's going to become exhausted and not be able to defend himself and not be able to finish the match. That is the number one fear of any combat athlete. So it's very easy for two boxers to come across the ring, never say a word to each other, and adhere to this unwritten agreement that we're going to stand around for the next 15 minutes and then we're going to get into this thing. I tell you that because while it's so painfully boring to watch boxing, and boxing happens to be my second favorite sport in the whole world, okay, before anybody comes down on me and thinks Chael's putting boxing down, I'm well aware. I love the sport of boxing, but I'm also aware of how boring it is to watch. It's only boring because of that reason. The leadership in boxing is as dumb as the athletes that are out there punching one another in the head for a hobby, okay? Let me tell you, this is the blind leading the blind. This is the inmates taking over the asylum to the highest of levels. It's always had lousy leadership. It can never fit. It's all about corruption and dirtiness and money. It's the most... Here's the deal. As painful as it is to watch, it's still on TV, so the announcer has to cover for it. So the announcer begins talking about a feeling out. They're feeling each other out. No such thing. Never been a fight in the world where there's a feeling out process. There's been a really crappy and boring product placed on television for the viewer to watch, and they called it boxing. And they scheduled it for too goddamn many rounds. So the announcer had to say something other than, hey, turn your channel, this sport sucks. So now they start talking about the feeling and the timing and the rhythm. As much as I'm dismissing that, this is a pie and that's a broad stroke, okay? Of the pie, it does represent a little bit of a slice. That is a piece to it. There is a rhythm and there is a timing where you're trying to find your opponent, particularly if he's got a lot of movement, a lot of head movement, a lot of footwork. If he can disguise things, maybe he's a little bit longer, he's flicking a jab out and he knows how to use it. Bop, moves his head a little bit. There is some timing and there is some rhythm out there. I'll tell you, if you're ever going to train, if you're ever on a heavy bag, and here's something that Coach Clayton used to, everybody that trained with Coach Clayton had to do this every day. You get on the heavy bag and you will find a rhythm. You will find a rhythm. Sometimes you'll have a song playing in the background. You'll even punch the bag to the beat of the song. It just happens real naturally. You slip a kick in there. All of a sudden you have your rhythm and you're trying to get these punch. Clayton will make you disrupt your rhythm. So if it's boom, 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 he'll make a boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Trying to use bumps and beats for you here, but I want you to understand there is a rhythm to the timing. That's just how your body's going to work. A fight, after all, is nothing more than a dance. One person leads at a time, but it's a dance. This step, followed by this step, followed by this step. So if you can be good at boom, boom, throwing your rhythm off, go back into the rhythm, go back into the rhythm, boom, boom. Change your speed, change your power. Maybe you throw a couple of jabs out, boom, then you throw one hard jab out. But you do that to throw your opponent off. You do it so that he can never get used to your rhythm and your timing.
Hi, Dr. Chael. This is Farzan from Kitchener, Ontario. I was just wondering, for people who train MMA, not necessarily for the purposes of competition, but rather for self-defense, would it be beneficial to be practicing or rather emphasizing techniques that are deemed illegal currently, such as the 12 to 6 elbow or soccer kicks, assuming that the reason they're banned is because of the devastating damage that they can inflict on an opponent, which could be very useful in, say, a street fight situation that a lot of people would be preparing for? And if not, why? Thank you.
Okay, so I get your point. I understand your philosophy and I understand the question. I want to answer it in a responsible way. I don't like, as soon as I hear the word street fight, I don't like it. I just don't. I'm a prude on that stuff, and somebody can really get hurt, and I'm not into that. I'm into unarmed, regulated, unified rules combat. I don't like the street stuff, but I do understand that when you take a kid into martial arts, you're talking about confidence or self-esteem. I do understand that you're getting that on the guise of what happens if you end up in unarmed combat in the streets. It is a real thing. What you're asking me is a very real thing. I get it. I just feel there's a lack of responsibility in me not saying what I just said. So let me tie it in to unarmed combat, okay? Mixed martial arts. Basically, at one point in time, in the mid to late 90s, you could just go find any contested martial art out there, any form of combat that is contested. Go look into what was illegal within those sports and then know, okay, that's going to be really good in mixed martial arts. Let me use an example, but dirty boxing. And I use this as an example. I could offer you 10 more, but I offer you dirty boxing because I know you've heard the term, and I know that you'll also understand the comparison. If you go into boxing and you grab a guy, okay, the referee will step in and break you. It is illegal to do. You can't grab, you can't hold. He must separate you. Now, the reason it's illegal is because it's so wildly effective. If you get in there and you can clinch a guy and push and pull him or grab him behind his neck, Randy Couture, dirty boxing. Some people will call it hockey, like in a hockey game when the players and something breaks off and one guy's grabbed and they start punching. It's so wildly affecting that the sport of boxing had to make it illegal. They say, hey, you can't do this. Well, you can't do it because it works so well. And there's so many other things that you're going to see like that. There's certain grappling competitions where a heel hook or a knee bar is banned. Well, the reason they're banned is because they're so wildly effective. You would end the contest, but you could possibly also injure your opponent. In the sport of wrestling, you can't do something called stalling. All stalling means is you can't back up. In wrestling, you must bend your knees and stand your ground, or you must be coming forward. You cannot go backwards. It is illegal. Well, the reason is nothing would happen. So if you go out in the sport of mixed martial arts and you're taking on a wrestler, just by example, and you think he's a better wrestler and you don't want to deal with wrestling, okay, great, go backwards. Simply back up and the wrestler will have nothing he can do. He won't even recognize that. He won't even see it. Never in all of his days of practice or in competition has he ever faced an opponent going backwards, just by example. So if you were to go through and find the things that were banned in other forms of combat at one point in mixed martial arts, it would give you a pretty good indicator of where to go and what was going to work. I hear what you're saying about the 12 to 6 elbow. I don't love the question, even though I do get it. I don't love it. Now what are we talking about? Are we talking about we start learning how to bite people and gouge eyes? I'm not into it. In the streets, in self-defense, you have the right to protect yourself. I'm all for it. But I do wish that a code of honor was even followed in the streets. I mean, what happened where you and this guy couldn't just turn and walk away? Was it really something that was so great that all of a sudden we're poking one another in the eyes? I mean, I think that would be a pretty rare occasion and certainly one that I hope that you were never faced with.